Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Marco Martino. I'm the subcommittee chair for the Health and Life Sciences Subcommittee at the Union League Club of Chicago. We try to, though it's been unfortunately compromised with COVID-19 pandemic, trying to meet every month to have a good program or so, but I think we're all getting a little zoomed out. So we've been doing these about every 3 or 4 months or so. So those who have joined us in the past, we've had about, I think, 3 or 4 webinars on the COVID-19 pandemic, still very much going on right now. But there's other issues going on as well, not only in our city, only in our state, our country as well. So I'm very lucky and blessed to have 3 great speakers here today. We're going to be talking about occupational stressors in the, particularly in first responders and law enforcement. As we have said in the past, this discussion will be strictly on occupational stressors and first responders, our law enforcement. I know this is a very trying time right now in law enforcement and as well in the community. So this will not be on social justice, though certainly we can have a great discussion on that as well at a later time. I'm also very grateful to have worked alongside Levi Moore from the Foxglove Alliance and Teresa from the Sheriff's Office as well. So the 3 of us, as well as countless others, have really put our energy into this program. This is a very important topic, especially of all that is going on in our country right now. So again, I am glad to be joined here by Dr. Carmen Clay, Ms. Rashonda Carroll, and Dr. Robert Sobel. And so how it'll go is about, each speaker will have, approximately 15 minutes or so. Either they'll give a formal presentation or just a nice discussion on occupational stressors in their particular field. And then we'll have, depending on how much time, we allot about 20 minutes or so of Q&A. So please, there's a Q&A function and a chat function. Please feel free at any time to, add Q&A in there, and then I will start to kind of fire off the Q&A to our panel at the end. I think that's where it'll become a great discussion. Let's just start right away with Dr. Carmen Clay. So Dr. Carmen Clay is a licensed clinical psychologist, earned her doctorate degree from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology in 2015. She also has a master's degree in forensic psychology and more than 15 years of experience providing mental health services, including the juvenile and adult correctional settings. Dr. Clay's interest shifted from the inmate population to that of law enforcement after noticing the various stressors that coexist for staff working with these environments. Currently, Dr. Clay serves as the Director of Employee Resiliency at the Cook County Sheriff's Office. Her career with the Sheriff's Office began in 2017 with the Department of Corrections, where she served as a director within the Inmate Programs and Services Department. In 2019, she was selected to join the Bureau of Human Resources at the Sheriff's Office to identify additional programs and resources to better support and promote staff wellness and resiliency. Dr. Clay is a member of the American Psychological Association, the APA Division 18 Psychologists in Public Service, International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Society for Police and Criminal Psychology. She is also the co-author of Pandemic, Protest, and Purpose, Police Psychology in a Great Time of Need. And I'll go through each bio before each speaker speaks. So no further ado, Dr. Carmen Clay, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Marco. I think I'm going to just share my screen here. Okay. Thumbs up if you guys can see slides.
Great.
Okay, am I in presentation mode?
Yeah, if you go to slideshow, it's about 7.
Yeah.
Slideshow, and then yep, there you go.
Okay, it's in slide presentation mode. When you guys
no, slideshow and click from beginning.
There. All right.
There we
Okay,
go.
sorry about that.
No worries.
All right, technical difficulties always seem to make their way present. All right, so impact of occupational stress, police and correction officers and their families. All right, so I was tasked with just giving a brief overview about essentially why we are here today, and just kind of giving some background information on some of the different stressors that are unfortunately familiar to the law enforcement community. All right, so definitely we want to start out with just kind of defining what is stress. So essentially stress is the human body's non-normal reaction to any demand that's placed upon it. So again, non-normal reaction. So we're responding to some type of demand that has been placed on us. And as it relates to stressors, stressors have been defined as any collection of adversive stimuli that accumulate over time and then lead to emotional and cognitive adaptations that accompany the stressors. So again, aversive stimuli, so something that's unfavorable that eventually builds up over time and leads to different emotional and cognitive changes that accompany these stressors. And then as it relates to occupational stress or job-related stress, is defined as a mechanism whereby the human body attempts to adapt to the work environment. So this is specific to those stressors that we experience at work. And then Quick and Henderson defined occupational stress as a health risk for a range of psychological, behavioral, and medical disorders and diseases. All right. And then according to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, 1/4 of workers reported being stressed, being quite a bit or extremely stressed at work. 1/4 of employees viewed their jobs as the number one stressors in their lives. And 3/4 of employees believe that workers has more on the job stress than a generation ago. So on the job stress now is more prevalent than it was just a generation ago. And then problems at work are more strongly associated with health complaints than are any other life stressors. So more so than even financial problems or family problems. So this research is kind of showing that occupational stressors weigh heavily and it's real, and staff are really reporting discomfort as a result. So the different types of occupational stress as it relates to law enforcement, we can kind of look at these as two different categories. So you have the job content stressors, which are those operational stressors. So pretty much all those aspects that come with police work that are inherent to the job. So for example, when my son talks about police officers, he talks about fighting the bad guys and getting the bad guys. So just kind of those things that come with police work, those operational stressors. And then you have those job context stressors, which are more organizational. So the conditions under which the job is performed, essentially maybe characteristics of the organization. And then what staff might refer to as those daily hassles. Okay. So just to kind of give an example of some of the operational stressors, pretty common, what we kind of know police work to be, but it consists of the different shift work and the different shift schedules. So maybe working third shift or mandatory overtime, the different shift changes that officers and correctional officers will be exposed to, the daily exposure to violence. So being shot at or firing or discharging your own weapon, personal threats of harm. So whether you're working in corrections and you've been threatened by a detainee, or if you're threatened by gang members on the street, but just that personal threat that comes with the line of work. Obviously, physical strain and injuries on our bodies from, injuries on the officers' bodies from maybe running or fighting or having to de-escalate someone, physically de-escalate someone. You have the traumatic events, so exposure to violence, those threats of death, being victimized. And then for correctional officers as well, I included gang activity, contraband, different things within the correctional environment that can contribute to their level of stress, as well as the overcrowding and any potential staffing issues. And then as it relates to those organizational stressors that we often see, so just those overall bureaucratic formalities and policies that come with law enforcement. So the chain of command, not going outside of the chain of command to get your needs met. So those different type of formalities that staff have to follow. Also inadequate resources, inadequate equipment, maybe a lack of training or availability to training is also a stressor. And I imagine that this was definitely prevalent currently now and at the start of COVID-19. So having the appropriate PPE and just kind of understanding what's going on, what's the policies, being trained in certain things, the high job demand, but the low job control. So essentially correctional officers and police officers tend to have very little input in the decisions that are made as it relates to how they do their job and how they should do their job safely. Perceived lack of leadership and supervisory support. Some staff perceive their pay as inadequate, as well as receiving poor performance evaluations and maybe being unnecessarily disciplined. And then additionally, as we speak more about organizational stressors, the research is starting to show that actually the organizational stressors are the greatest source of stress. So I know initially we kind of thought the operational stressors were weighed the heaviest on officers in their line of work, but the research is starting to show that it's more of those organizational stressors that are causing the greatest difficulties. So a study completed by Amaranto and colleagues found that officers describe organizational stress as oppressive, unnecessary, and inescapable. So those organizational structures and rules and things that go on within the organization, they describe those as oppressive. And then a 2003 study with the Newark, New Jersey Police Department, officers disclosed that those organizational stressors provided them the greatest stress because they often were second guessed in their field of work. They felt punished for minor infractions. There was often a lack of reward for a job well done. And then they also feared, there was a fear of being degunned. So in the event that they did experience any personal or stress-related problems, they kind of feared being stripped of their weapons or feared that they would have to undergo a fitness for duty and be removed from duty. And then as a result of these things, obviously low morale was noted as one of the major organizational stressors for them. So then we can't talk about work stress or occupational stress without talking about burnout. So essentially burnout is just a gradual decrease in work engagement because of chronic exposure to stressful situations. So I think the key words here are a gradual onset. A lot of times people don't realize that they're burned out, or officers don't realize they're burned out until they've actually burned out, which may take a few years. And then it's due to chronic exposure to these stressful situations. So 3 types of burnout: physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. So we might see that in just maybe irritability, being tired, being fatigued, poor sleeping, things of that nature. Cynicism and decreased job satisfaction. So that might be evident in just kind of this pessimistic outlook, maybe a poor attitude as it relates to how the officers are experiencing their job and their career. And then also work inefficiency. So maybe making more mistakes, attendance problems, like abuse of sick time. So just not being 100% in their job duties as they probably were at the start of their career. And then burnout is noticed or recognized as a serious professional hazard and a psychosocial risk at work. So it's pretty important. It's a big deal. If you're burned out, it definitely impacts your work and your productivity, which is important for officers because it's a safety threat and safety risk for them as well. Okay. All right, and then these are just a few examples of some adverse stress responses that we typically see with officers, police officers, and correctional officers. So some of the impacts of operational and organizational stress can include cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, which is any cluster of symptoms that can put an officer at risk for heart disease, diabetes, stroke, increased weight gain around their midsection, things of that nature, fatigue, sleep deprivation, and undiagnosed sleep disorders. We also notice increased emotional distress, so depression, anxiety, Obviously, for those officers who have been involved in some type of trauma or witnessed some type of trauma, there are increased risk for PTSD or post-traumatic stress, as well as hopelessness and suicide. Increased alcoholism or additional unhealthy or maladaptive coping strategies, we notice, as well as absenteeism, poor job performance, distractibility for those officers who are on the job. They're physically there, but they're not physically present. Again, this is a safety risk because in this type of work, this line of work, staff need to be alert at all times, as well as work-life imbalance, burnout and exhaustion, and then poor quality of life for post-retirement and decreased life expectancy. I believe the research showed or stated that the average life expectancy for a police officer is the age of 57, which is 22 years younger than the general population. And then a few mental health statistics. So as it relates to depression, 1 out of 15 officers currently or will experience depression at some point. PTSD, officers are 5 times more prevalent, or I'm sorry, PTSD is 5 times more prevalent among police officers. 25% of police officers have some type of serious problem as it relates to alcohol. And then between 2006 and 2019, so within a 3-year period, 600 officer suicides were reported. And at least 460 of those were active duty status at the time of their deaths. And then 78% of officer suicides were preceded by a psychiatric diagnosis of some sort. And of that 78%, 60% of those diagnoses were depression. And then as it relates to stress and burnout, the literature review determined that or found that 85% of officers do report some type of high operational stress or stress due to operational issues. 11% report significant levels of burnout. 28% report high distress levels. And then more than half, 55%, are already at risk of some type of psychological disorder. And then as we look at that work-life balance and how this interplays with officers and their families, we notice increased disengagement from family activities. So the officer, they may be there again, but just mentally not engaged in activities and family life. So physically present, but mentally and emotionally disengaged, physically absent. So that could be due to work schedules or just being too tired to engage and just not being there because they're working mandatory overtime and things of that nature. We also find that the spouses also report increased stress levels, right? Your loved one is under extreme levels of stress. So of course you're gonna feel that, you're gonna worry about them. So that's gonna spill over to the spouses. And then those difficulties balancing family roles. So if an officer has been the integral part of the family dynamic as it relates to maybe picking up kids, taking them to school, fixing meals, all those other household responsibilities. If they're not there or they're not emotionally present, then that's going to kind of disrupt that, disrupt the family dynamic, which again now puts stress on the family. They may have a need to exert unnecessary control while they're in the home. So kind of bringing the job home with them, feeling that it needs to be highly controlled or highly structured, making sure that the kids are in line and doing everything a particular way. So just kind of not knowing how to turn off police work or correctional work when they enter into the household. And then obviously, as we know, there's always increased marital problems and unfortunately leading to divorce, and then the strained relationships with children. So maybe being more irritable, again, are not present, missing baseball games or different things that parents typically probably would be present for if they were feeling well and things were a little more balanced in their lives. So what can organizations do? So I know Dr. Sobel and Ms. Carroll are going to talk more specifically probably about those individual resources and supports that they provide to staff. So I'm going to speak a little just about the organizations. So essentially what organizations can do to kind of help promote better outcomes for staff and help decrease stress. is definitely that buy-in from upper management and administration. So a training that I attended a couple of weeks ago, something was said that just really stuck out with me, and I feel like I repeat this several times a day. Do you have a program, a wellness program, or do you have a culture of wellness? So it shouldn't just be an isolated wellness program or an isolated program devoted to staff. You want to have that idea of or culture of wellness embedded in everything that you do, if possible, in your policies, in your procedures, in the way that you interact with staff. Also, the availability of training and programs. So any type of resources such as resiliency training, stress management training, trainings to empower staff to be able to cope and manage the daily stressors that they will interact or encounter. So empowering them to learn about these things, that psychoeducation, giving them the tools to help manage their own well-being. Obviously, leadership development. So frontline supervisors are pretty much those gatekeepers that we rely on to kind of understand when something might be wrong with staff and when staff might need some additional support. So providing leadership development to frontline leadership, because resilient leaders essentially produce resilient staff. And then giving consideration to any structural or organizational changes that may need to occur. So like I said earlier, the policies, procedures, are there anything or is there anything that can be changed or done differently to better support staff as it relates to the rules and the regulations? And are there any rules and regulations or policies that are likely to cause staff additional stress? And then the development of any in-house wellness programs and in-house resources, as well as allowing staff some type of access to outside EAP services or inside EAP services, as well as peer support programs. So those are just a few things that organizations can do. I'm going to pass it along to my teammates here to talk more about individually some of the things and the services and programs that they've been able to provide for staff.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Clay. Again, if there any questions were came up during Dr. Clay's presentation, please put them in the Q&A and we'll definitely be addressing them at the end during our allotted time. We'll now shift gears to Dr. Robert Sobel. So as a bio, Dr. Robert Sobel has a master's in education, a doctorate in clinical psychology, and an extensive background in neuropsychology. He began his career as a neuropsychologist specializing in organic brain dysfunction, head trauma, and stroke rehabilitation at the New York University Medical Center. Dr. Sobel serves as a consultant to various government agencies and has served as a national trainer for OJJDP and the National District Attorneys Association for more than 20 years. Dr. Sobel has been with the Chicago Police Department since 1999 and is currently the director of Professional Counseling Division / Employee Assistance Program, or EAP. He specializes in working with police and family members suffering from trauma related to work or personal experiences, as well as other emotional consequences that can be the result of on-the-job experiences effect on family. Dr. Sobel works with individuals, couples, and families on a variety of issues to promote well-being. In that practice, he conducts training, consultation, interventions, and treatment on a variety of issues, including suicide, drug and alcohol, depression, stress management, and vicarious trauma. Dr. Sobel, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I hope that this finds you today, that you are well and your families are well. Building on what Dr. Clay said, I thought I would say, well, what does this all look like in real time? In other words, what does it look like in terms of the police population that we are currently seeing today when they come to our attention because they need some sort of support services or intervention to help them along with the stress, the trauma, and the anxiety that they deal with every day? You know, if you would imagine if you had to wake up every day and instead of getting dressed in a suit and a tie or whatever attire it is that you may use to go to work, your attire consists of things that protect you, your life, and the well-being of others, and that you are responsible for that. Because the uniform of a Chicago police officer has lethal weaponry. And the responsibility of carrying that and protecting yourself, your well-being, and those of others is an extraordinary stress. On top of that, as you are aware, we've had COVID. So over the past over a year now, COVID has had a tremendous impact on law enforcement. And the impact has been that on top of the daily stress and the trauma that they experience, when any call that they respond to could turn and does turn into anything, the fear that that interaction that you have today could be the one where you catch COVID, and the anxiety of the impact of what that will do to your well-being and your life. And what happens if you get COVID? How is that going to impact your family and the fear of bringing that home? That's increased the anxiety level of our officers. And as a result, when they go home out of that fear, they've been isolating themselves more and wanting to protect others. That isolation has been dangerous in that they're left alone with their anxiety, their depression, their traumas, in a room by themselves, alone in their own thoughts, struggling to cope with all of that on a daily basis. And what we've found is the result of that is that we've had increased alcohol usage, because in order to deal with it and their loneliness, they've increased alcohol to try and de-stress, to cope with the daily grind, the loneliness. And the impact on them is, of course, increased anxiety, increased depression, increased symptoms of trauma. The impact of the family on that is evident in that since last summer, we have had the largest increase of families looking for clinical support than we have ever had in the 22 years that I have been with the Chicago Police Department. Families have felt rejected, concerned, lonely, and children respond to that in ways that have caused them acting out behaviors that are concerning. Family members like police officers have experienced the increase of the consequences of COVID on top of having a law enforcement family person on the job every day. On top of that, we've had civil unrest. We've had wonderful demonstrations to look for justice and equality. We have had riots. We have had demonstrations. And in order to deal with that as a department and a community, our law enforcement officers have had canceled days off and mandatory overtime. In some cases, our police officers have had 2 to 3 weeks of straight shift work, no days off, and increased hours. That's caused physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, and imagine being on the streets in the heat or cold weather, day after day, and wanting to wear a mask to protect yourself and others in a responsible way. The impact on that physically is that it's exhausting. If you've ever worn a mask, sometimes it can be a little more difficult to breathe. But if you're wearing a mask for 8 to 16 hours a day, every day, for weeks at a time, think about what that does to your physical well-being. On top of that, it can make it extraordinarily difficult for officers to communicate to one another about things that they need to be aware of. Facial gestures are a great and important way that our officers communicate with one another in terms of danger, anxiety, letting others know about what might be going on. So that has a tremendous impact. And because of the exhaustion, physical and mental exhaustion is going to have an impact on your thinking, your cognitive well-being. And officers need to be sharp. They need to be, as we call, hypervigilant, aware of what's going on in front of them, in back of them, to the left of them and to the right of them. And if you don't have the mental wherewithal to be able to do that, that puts yourself and others in dangers. Because as we see on the news, officers have a split second to make decisions about use of force that could save a life, protect a life, or in some cases, put themselves and others in great danger. Because what controls use of force decisions is cognitive clarity, the ability to make those decisions, take in information at a moment's notice and make a decision. And exhaustion, physically or mentally, is going to impair that. And unfortunately, as we have seen, many of our officers have gotten physically hurt. They've been in dangerous situations. Maybe they're not as capable of diffusing situations because they're too exhausted to be able to make sharp decisions within a moment's time. That causes physical ailment and emotion and compromise to their well-being. And again, that has caused an increase in alcohol usage, domestic problems, significant psychological impact of the wellness of our families, because the wellness of a police officer can dictate how well their families are functioning. So we see spouses and children suffering a lot of the same symptoms as our officers do. And that becomes a problem in terms of domestic problems, children with anxiety, depression, severe acting out at home, at school, with friends, and wherever they may be, because their law enforcement family member isn't functioning well, isn't able to attend to them and help nurture them and feel safe. On top of that, a lot of our officers express that they feel that they've been demonized. They watch television and they see on the news that they are portrayed in a negative light. Their perception is that they've become the enemy of the community rather than the protectors, rather than those that put their lives on the line day in, day out, every single day. And I've had actually many officers tell me that they no longer feel safe on the job, safe at home, appreciated, and attended to. Many officers have said, and one in particular I remember said that they walked past a mirror and they saw a reflection and it wasn't of themselves anymore. It was of a symbol, and the symbol was ugly. And they no longer felt good about themselves as a human being or as a police officer. Imagine going out on the streets every day with that perception, or even going home and carrying that weight and the feeling about oneself and trying to interact with others when you no longer feel good about yourself, and it actually changes the way you see yourself physically. So our officers have a difficult time seeing that, because they're submerged in the potential of violence. They are overwhelmed with some of the pictures that they see in ways that they are depicted. And as Dr. Clay mentioned, there's a big problem with organizational well-being in law enforcement. And many of our officers will say they don't feel supported. They don't feel nurtured or recognized for the job that they are doing. And that even though they are facing such trauma in an increased way that, many of our veteran officers have never experienced, they still get up and they do the job every single day to the best of their abilities. So our officers need support. They need support in the media. They need support by the organizations that they work with, that they work for, and they need support by the public. Because if our officers don't feel safe and they are fatigued and they are exhausted, how can we as a community expect them to be out there day in and day out with wellness and the ability to do their job, as they should? The impact that I see clinically is that we have never done more trauma debriefings than we have in the past year. And trauma debriefings are when an officer or a group of officers need to come in an environment that is, of course, confidential, legally privileged, in order to talk about what they've witnessed, what they've experienced, so that they can process it, relieve themselves of the feelings and guilt or anger or whatever the emotions that they might have in connection to actions that they took, so that symptoms of trauma don't take down their well-being. That's mandatory in the Chicago Police Department, which is a phenomenal thing because it means that our officers are getting protected. When we recognize that an officer's been through an incident where they may need to talk and unload about the impact of an incident, they have to come in and process it so that we can help make sure that their well-being isn't compromised. Never before have I seen a group of officers come in voluntarily to talk about the fact that they are done. They are exhausted physically and mentally, and they feel beaten. And they need to come in to talk about that so that they feel supported, so that they feel well. And that has been an ongoing issue for about a year and a half now. And I think that speaks to the extraordinary responsibility that they face every single day in ways that they have not had to in years, and in many cases, decades. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll just quickly talk about, well, as a program, what do we have built in order to help these officers and their family members? So we're fortunate enough to have an in-house EAP. And our EAP consists of an alcohol program, which is sworn officers who are state certified to deal with drug and alcohol usage for our members and our family members. And by the way, we have never had more calls from family members and officers struggling from drug and alcohol usage than we have over the past year and a half. We have a clinical program that provides individual, marital, family therapy, and trauma services for our family members and our police officers. And our trauma services are available to our family members because they are traumatized by the consequences that their law enforcement family member is experiencing currently and ongoing. And we have a phenomenal peer support program. And a peer support program is our law enforcement officers of all ranks that volunteer their time on top of their normal everyday duties to be available for support to our officers, to talk to them, to help them deal with what it is that they're struggling with on the job. And they have a myriad of personal and professional experiences themselves that can be of great value to our officers and family members, such as illness, loss of a child, an officer who's involved in a shooting. That officer who's involved has gone through a shooting and is a peer support member can act as a model of hope and healing, because nobody can help another officer so much as another officer who has been in those shoes and made it through, and has not only survived but thrived during it. So a robust, complex EAP with mental health services for officers and family members is crucial, not only to the well-being of our membership and family members, but to the community, because a department that is well and is taken care of physically and mentally is much more capable of keeping our communities safe. So that's what I have to contribute today. I could go on forever, but I want to be able to share this time and give others an opportunity to share their great knowledge and experience as well.
Dr. Sobel, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. We will conclude with our last speaker, Ms. Rashonda Carroll. Rashonda Carroll is the director of the Peer Support Department for the Cook County Sheriff's Office, which is responsible for providing crisis intervention, education, and supportive services to all sworn, civilian, and retired members of the Sheriff's Office 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. Prior to this role, Ms. Carroll served in a number of positions related to corrections facility wellness. In 2003, she served as the director of inmate programs and services, where she led the coordination of programs and correctional rehabilitation services for 11,000 inmates in the custody of the Cook County Department of Corrections. In 2008, she served as assistant executive director of programs for the Cook County Department of Corrections and led the efforts of the inmate programs and services department, which included shared daily managerial oversight of several housing divisions. In 2010, she moved into the role of executive director for the Cook County Sheriff's Reentry and Diversion Programs Department, which included the Sheriff's Boot Camp, Pre-Release Center, Men's Day Reporting, Youth Services Department, Inmate Programs and Services Department, Department of Community Outreach, Senior Law Enforcement Academy, and Suburban Services and Community Affairs. In that position, Ms. Carroll was responsible for the department's collaborative work towards administrating prevention programs to at-risk communities and groups throughout Cook County, with a focus on providing in-custody programs to the inmate population, promoting individual change from injurious behavior into productive and contributing members of society. Ms. Carroll, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marco. So to start, I actually want to talk a little bit about the fact that being involved in the Cook County Sheriff's Office for the number of years that I've been involved, I started with inmate services, but I got an opportunity firsthand, like many of us in law enforcement, to watch officers day in and out come into work and do the jobs that they do with the kind of risk that is involved. And when I think about what Dr. Sobel has said and what Dr. Clay said, you know, as it relates to COVID and adding that extra stress is monumental when it comes to having to get up every single day and do what they do. And I watched it and I prepared for it in a different way. And then all of a sudden I became part of the wellness piece. And for that reason, I have so much more respect for the years and years and years that I've seen police on the street for the Sheriff's Office. I've seen them inside of the Cook County Department of Corrections, you know, housing inmates and transporting them to and fro every single day and just incurring the kind of risk that they incur. Also, we have the Court Services Department. They deal with the inmates that come in right off the street. They have addictions, they have all kinds of situations that you have to deal with right there right as you're trying to, house them and get them ready for court or get them ready to be intake into the Department of Corrections. And so when you think about peer support, which is where we work right now, and the idea of wellness for the Cook County Sheriff's Office and how important it's going to be as we move forward, even out of this COVID era, that we're going to have to look at all the insulation that we can possibly install and keep in place for years to come for officers and their families. And so, like Dr. Sobel said, we introduced a peer support department in 2008 for the Sheriff's Office. And at that time, it was a mobile unit. And so there were a team of individuals who dealt with substance abuse issues, crisis intervention, and clinical services in a way that they did not have a safe space for people to come to and actually feel the level of confidentiality and the level of respect that they needed in order to do what they needed to do. And that was release all of the stress. And so in 2012, the program advanced to an offsite, meaning off the Sheriff's Office campuses in Oak Forest, to establish an actual office space where they have clinicians, and our clinicians are amazing at what they do. We have peer counselors, we have a licensed clinical professional counselor who actually is involved daily with individual, group, marital, couples, counseling. We have a grief counseling piece that we connect with another department within the Sheriff's Office, community outreach, where we can have spiritual care when there's a time of need. And all of these services are extended to our retirees, our civilian staff, and their immediate family members. So we're trying to close the gap in any way possible to ensure that officers and corrections officers and court services deputies are actually getting the services that they need. And even if we add more, and we know we need to, right now, we're focused, and I mean ultra focused on making sure they have the access to the programs, from stress management and anger management to PTSD support to substance abuse treatment. We are literally putting people in treatment programs on a regular basis, and even more so now, as Dr. Sobel said, with COVID being, on the rise and, fully in effect in our communities. And so their coping mechanisms are not what they need to be. And so there's education around that. And we've done the educational part, but we want to continue to do more. There's just not enough in place, but we're moving in that direction. And that's kind of exciting because we know what it takes to actually push wellness into a spotlight for those individuals who truly need it. Now, changing the stigma of actually, people wanting to come out, they're doing it now because of COVID. I hope that they continue to look at self-care as a reason to really get healthy again too. And so getting the buy-in from them and making them aware that anytime you can come in for a check-in, anytime that you can refer people, but it's okay for you as an individual to come out and actually take part in the services that might be available for you that could literally change some of the stress levels that you currently have. You could be adapting new coping skills. And so in that mindset, we continue to do trainings when available. And with COVID, it hasn't been quite as easy to do it. But when we can do the trainings, we're training in resiliency. We're training in mindfulness and meditation techniques. We're training in all sorts of PTSD coping techniques. We're training in suicide awareness and prevention, and just keeping people abreast as necessary so that they can be well enough informed to get the help when they truly need it. And so, when you think about the heart of peer support, at the heart of peer support, when you package it all together, we just want the staff to know on behalf of the entire administration that we're here to celebrate you when you're on your game, but we're also here holding you up when you're at your lowest point. And many people need that. They need to know that we're here. And in as much as we can make that known to them, that's what we want to do. We're committed and we're compassionate about the idea of moving wellness into a direction that becomes a real movement. And why do I say movement? Because the sheriff's office really, based on everything you've heard today, wants to move the needle from just the foundation and the good work that's being done right now to a most effective, thoughtful, and meaningful menu of supportive services to undergird the mental, the emotional, and the physical well-being of the men and women who commit to do this job every single day. It's important to us. And as we move forward, we are going to continue to strive to do our best to create that type of programming. And just like Dr. Sobel said, we've had numerous amounts of people come into peer support. This year, for the last year, from April to April, I could say that there has not been a day that we haven't had to address the needs and concerns of even the family members of our officers. We've dealt with the hospitalization and the at-home recovery of all of our COVID individuals. Our programs extend even into those individuals who are on duty injury. So they've been injured on the job and they're at home or they're hospitalized, and now they're trying to transition their lives. They're trying to deal with the benefit packages. They're trying to assess when they will be able to come back to work and what that truly looks like. We've acknowledged that and worked with HR so that we can do check-ins with them. We deal with people who are suffering from pending disciplinary issues. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're going to face some discipline, there could be some other work-related issues that are going to come into play, some financial issues that may come into play. And so we have to show them the level of support that they need just to get through that process. We have, so many different areas that we work with as it relates to that. And one in particular is our bereavement care. When an officer passes away or a retiree passes away, whether it's just an active duty death or a line of duty death, we work with the Sheriff's Police Department to provide this package. We have a liaison who works with the family immediately upon notification. We deal with the benefit packages for death benefits for the employee and family. We actually attend the funeral services. And in the funeral service, we actually provide the procession escort. And we offer memorial presentations. And we just want to make sure everybody knows, even during times of sorrow, that we're supporting them. So trying to wrap around each person and the things that they experience day in and out in their lives, from the risks that they take when they get up in the morning to the losses that they suffer when they go home at night. That is huge for us. And we're doing our best to wrap those services around them, morning to evening and through the night. That's why we're 24 hours a day. That's why we're 7 days a week. And that's why wellness means so much to us. And so we're moving in that direction. There's a couple of other initiatives that are going to be coming up as it relates to wellness. But I'm just excited to be a part of it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. That was absolutely wonderful as well. Thank you. We got some questions that have been coming through the Q&A. So without further ado, let's fire away for about the next 15 minutes, the next 15, 20 minutes or so. One of which was directed towards Dr. Clay. Looks like you started to address it. So Dr. Clay, what are some examples or suggestions you can offer to assist in evolving an organization from wellness programs to a culture of wellness?
Yeah, well, essentially by that, I mean, just like taking a deeper look at the current policies and procedures, the programmings, pretty much anything that you do moving forward, taking a look at how that will impact officers. Will that provide a sense of relief, or will it add to the level of stress that they may already be experiencing? So just kind of adding that additional leg to the thought processes that come about when making decisions and making new policies and procedures. I mean, anything from a vending machine, paying close attention, in terms of physical wellness, paying close attention, are there opportunities for staff to access healthy snacks while they're on duty? Or are there opportunities for, healthy luncheons to be provided versus, I know where the sheriff's office is located, there's not many healthy lunch options around, staff are busy, they're getting food delivered, and before you know it, the weight gain starts, and, it just kind of eventually catches up with you. So paying attention to just even the smallest things and how you can make small changes to promote wellness. And if you can do that in the various different aspects and under the various different umbrellas, then eventually I would think that you would have a holistic wellness culture, a culture of wellness. So we have wellness embedded in all of the decisions that we make. As it relates to policies about disciplinary, as it relates to policies about attendance. Do staff have availability to take time off for mental health care and mental health time? And when they're just not feeling emotionally apt and emotionally well to come in and do their job? No, they may not be physically sick, but are they able to get some type of supports for just not being well and having time to deal with whatever emotional issues they may need to? So just essentially taking a deeper look into policies and procedures and the new programs and the new things that you want to do, and making a decision about how wellness can be incorporated into that. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Oh my gosh, you missed. I had gold I was spilling out here. No, no, thank you. So another question, kind of shifting gears a little bit. It looks like Dr. Clay, you may have started to answer it. That's what's showing here, but anyone can, please chip in. Is it true that an officer who is admitted for evaluation out of state will not get their FOID revoked?
I don't know the answer to that. Dr. Sobel, I believe you might have made mention to that on the previous call that we had. So I don't know if that's something that you can address.
It depends on those state laws and how it is handled through a medical section, how much time is taken off, because, when an officer is gone from the job for a certain amount of time, the department has to know, well, where have you been? What have you been doing? And the state of Illinois will, on a rotating basis, look at the FOID status of all of our officers to see where it is. And it is very possible that that could be found. But what we've done is we've worked very closely with the state to find ways for our officers to get that FOID card back. And, not too long ago, if you lost your FOID card, it was next to impossible to get it back. And let's say an officer was previously suicidal, went in for treatment, has recovered and is doing well now, and is no longer a threat to him or herself. Imagine coming out of that, still not being as strong as they need to be, and finding out they are on a no pay status. The catastrophic consequence of that, meaning they can no longer afford to support themselves and their families, can cause an increase in suicidality and can actually almost put them in a more dangerous place. So what we've done is we've looked for ways that the state will work with law enforcement to expedite and give them hope and a good chance of getting that FOID card back. So that's where things stand for the moment. And I say moment because these laws change constantly with public pressure, with protocols and general orders by different law enforcement and state regulations and laws.
Thank you, Dr. Sobel. Shifting gears a little bit again, so what can non-officers or their families do to support officers and their families? This is for everyone.
Listen. Listening sounds so simple, but it's extraordinarily difficult. because a lot of times our family members don't know what to do or what to say. They're concerned about the well-being of their law enforcement family member, and they struggle with what to do in order to help them as well. But being present and listening and engaging with them so that they feel better, nurturing them, letting them know that they are okay, that they are loved, that the fears that they have about themselves is no longer being the person that they once were because of the accumulated stress and trauma, can be very healing. And a lot of our family members come in for counseling to learn how to do that for their family members, as well, so that they can be, a healing person for, for that person that they have in their family that's in law enforcement.
Right? Anyone else like to contribute to that? Okay, a question that was directed towards Ms. Carroll. So Ms. Carroll, your description of services provided by the peer support program sounds to be more similar to EAPs as opposed to traditional peer support programs, which consist of officers supporting other officers. If that is the case, is there a program within the Sheriff's Department more similar to the traditional peer support programs?
So yes, in fact, the peer support program is just that. It was mentioned and described by Dr. Sobel, so I didn't repeat it. But in fact, our program was modeled after the Chicago Police Department's program, and we actually have officers on tap who actually support each other. In fact, there are several officers who have completed the volunteer certification program, and they are now actually in every branch of the sheriff's office, working alongside of their peers and coworkers. And if at any moment they are needed, they have direct access and immediate supportive services right there on their shift and detail where they're working.
Great. A question that might be for the whole panel. An individual or family counseling for an officer, is that done on a routine basis, or is it based upon predetermined basis, or only when requested by an officer?
At this time, I'll answer. At this time, it's done based on a request or a referral.
Very good.
In Chicago, it can be, most of it's done by request, but if a supervisor is concerned about an officer's well-being, that supervisor can make a mandatory visit to the EAP, a direct order, and that individual must come down, and it gives them an opportunity to talk about what's going on and take away stigma, because it's something that they have to do. The rest of it is, of course, up to the officers to what they do with that opportunity.
Very good. So a question that is directed towards you from one of our attendees is, they enjoyed your presentation, but the idea of trauma debriefing appears crucial. How can CPD be convinced this is a process that needs to be instituted for each and every traumatic event, not just officer-involved shootings?
It actually is. So our trauma debriefing general order does not just cover weapons discharge. It could be going to a domestic where a child is found in deplorable conditions, maybe malnutrition, is suffering from malnutrition, is dirty or abused, or in some cases, unfortunately, deceased. Of course, no human being can walk away from something like that unscathed. So the problem that we do have is, well, what is traumatic? And what's traumatic to one person may not be to another. So it's perception. So we train our supervisors on different aspects of trauma. We have our peer support trained in trauma, and we do mandatory trainings for all of our personnel on what constitutes trauma and how do you know that you may be traumatized. So the special order could be put in place by an individual, a supervisor, a clinician such as myself, or really anyone that brings attention to the fact that an officer or group of officers have been through something that they need to process in order to protect their well-being.
A question has come through, it's in the chat, and I would like all three to address this, because I think it's very pertinent to each one, is the wellness programs you have and are developing, are they adequately supported in your respective budget appropriations?
I think we could all say no. And the reason why is, look at the size of the population that the three of us serve. For Chicago, it's 18,000 employees, their family members, and retirees. We have 11 licensed clinicians for what is the size of a city. So the answer is no. How could we possibly adequately train, take care of the clinical needs of these men and women, and be available to them in an efficient, responsible way? Because well-being is not about responding to trauma and incidences. It's about teaching our law enforcement personnel about protecting their wellness, how to grow with it, how to keep it, and how to have it restored when it's compromised.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree. And again, this goes back to the culture of wellness. So ensuring that, budgets can handle different things that relate to wellness, that those thoughts and considerations are given when you're, thinking about wellness and how to allocate funds and budgeting. I know some departments have $1 million budgets as it relates to wellness, but I don't think that happened overnight. So it all comes with teaching and learning and educating leadership and educating those people up above who can make those decisions to allocate funds in certain ways and prioritize wellness and just kind of help support with the allocations of funding. But yeah, I mean, it's not enough of us to complete the work. So definitely the resources are scarce.
Sure. As you mentioned, the size as well.
Yeah.
Coming from the same department, I mean, staffing is just, limited, and it would be great to have more bodies, more boots on ground, being able to be in touch, direct communication, full access to people as soon as possible. When the need arises, we want to be there and we want to have sufficient staff to do so.
Along the same lines, a question that came through, what can be done that is not being done? And if so, if you have more resources, what would you like to see done with those additional resources? Which again is, as we're saying, we're dealing with a pretty large county and a pretty large city. So again, if you have more resources, what would you like to see done with it?
I'd like to see more inclusion of families at the beginning. So when recruits start this process, their families should start the process as well. So really working with families to engage them, to provide them about this process, providing psychoeducation, not to just the recruits, but the family members, talking to them about how things might change, different changes that you may see in your loved ones, and what to do when and if you notice these things to happen, such as the burnout, which I mentioned earlier, is just kind of that gradual shift. So what things you should start looking out for, what to do when you see those things, and how to contact specifically the sheriff's office, the peer support department, because once officers are 9 or 10 years into their career, and they may start to experience some difficulties, we can't just reach out to their families. They're the ones that would, need to reach out and engage their families. But if they have the idea that nothing's wrong and everything is okay, then it kind of provides a barrier to where the family can't reach out to us and get those resources. So I would just say, or I would like to see more outreach done with families, including them in the recruit process, and then so that they can go all the way through the process together.
I would like to see funding toward, being able to do real check-ins. I mean, self-care, huge. We keep talking about it. And like you said, from the very beginning, it's just that important that, we erase the stigma and understand, even now, if you look at it, COVID, more people are saying it's okay not to be okay. And if you just take the time from the very beginning, and we talk about this in class all the time, you got 30 years, possibly more, to do this job. And people are not living, as Dr. Sobel said, beyond retirement for very long. You even said it too, Dr. Clay. At some point, we're going to have to start early, get them in session, and get them the coping mechanisms that they need in place to carry them throughout the career.
Great. I'm not getting any more questions coming through. We also had about 8 or 9, so we had a lot of questions come through. Any last questions anyone wants to type in, either in the Q&A or the chat? Looks like we answered them. Wow, what a great panel. Very lucky and very grateful for all that you do. And then very lucky and grateful that you're able to share some time with us as well to educate us and to just kind of provide your insights. You work in crisis every day, and we're just so grateful for what you do. And I'd like to thank everyone who was able to attend this live session. I'd like to thank Teresa Olson from the Sheriff's Office. I blanked on her name very early on in the program. I'd like to thank Levi Moore from the Foxglove Alliance. I'd like to thank everyone who was able to join from your respective departments and from the Union League Club, Foxglove Alliance. So grateful. Thank you. We will, this program was recorded, so you can, once I get the recording, we can disseminate it amongst your departments, disseminate it to others as well. So thank you all so much. Very appreciative of your time and for your expertise.
Thank you.
Marco?
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Marco, before we go,
Yes.
I'd like to mention, and I think I see it on one of the chats.
Yes.
The Thomas J. Dart Foundation for Advancement of Social Justice. For anybody that's interested in getting involved and contributing, please visit the website at www.tjdartfoundation.org.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all. Looking forward to our next joint meeting. And again, Dr. Clay, Dr. Sobel, Ms. Carroll, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experiences and your time with us. Do appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Take care.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.